Okie dokie. So here is when I'll ask Natalie Charlton to turn her camera on so we can see her. And I'm going to introduce Natalie. So our keynote presenter today is Natalie Charlton. Natalie is the current pathway specialist for Paralympics Australia. Natalie has a legacy of building and delivering a variety of sport programs from grassroots community development through to performance pathways, as well as an experience in sport production and major events, including having very recently returned from the Paralympic Games where she led our Australian Friends and Family program. She also, and this I'd probably think would be the hardest job of all, managing the Queensland Wheelchair Rugby program, because if any of you know, I'm a handful. So she was our team manager, and she's also a part of the Australian Sport Commission working group to develop an intersectionality framework for leadership governance in sport, and is on the board of Proud to Play. Her honoured project, Factors Influencing Athletes Experiences Participating in the Parasport Pathway, uniquely situates her to explore why we have chosen her to tackle the role of equity and diversity in maximising performance. So I'm going to now turn my camera off and I'm going to go on mute and I'm going to hand over to Natalie. And yeah, we are in her hands. Welcome, Natalie. Could you please describe yourself for those listening online?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Natalie Charlton. I am a woman wearing a black and white high neck top, and I have blue eyes and brown hair that's pulled back, and I'm wearing little white earrings, and I'm sitting in front of a green background with the Paralympics Australia logo in gold in the top corner. So I will just share my screen as well. One moment. That working for everybody. Please let me know if there's any problems. But thank you very much for the introduction, Ella, really appreciate it. And a huge thank you to Griffith Uni Inclusive Futures and the Queensland Parasport Research Network for having me here today. I too would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting from today. I'm on the land of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, as well as all First Nations peoples joining us here today. As Ella mentioned, for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet or getting to know, I work at Paralympics Australia as a pathway specialist within our performance strategy department and have been part of Paralympics Australia for almost 4 years now. During this time, I've largely worked across participation and pathways with a focus now specifically on supporting our national sports organisations and our National Institute network to establish and develop para pathways and identify and progress athletes through these pathways. During the last few years with PA, this work has also included roles that initially began as participation and pathways coordinators with a focus on supporting the system from entry-level and grassroots participation programs and, as I said, has now progressed to more of a performance and talent development environment focus with our sports. Prior to these roles, I also worked to build and develop a variety of sports pathways and talent environments. I've worked with other state and national sporting organisations. I've done a bit of work in sport for development and community outreach type programs. And I have also worked in sports diplomacy and building environments overseas. As Ellis noted, I've also had some really different sports background experience with more of a focus in events and major events, as she said recently with the Paris 2024 Australian Paralympic team, as well as game day production and broadcast. But I think the biggest thing that I've learned from creating, supporting and maintaining all of these different environments has been the overwhelming importance of creating spaces that people want to be in and want to develop in. And in order to achieve their goals and ultimately strive for success, these environments have been critical. And it's all about how the culture supports and ingrains this. These different environments were certainly not without their own challenges and hurdles, but the ones that I am most proud of being part of were those that were committed to being welcoming and open to all. And what I don't think was a coincidence with each of these was that there were almost that these were the most successful environments, and that success can come in many different forms, but the places and spaces that people love to be in were where they felt like they could bring their full selves to, and they wanted to be there and stay there, were the ones that ultimately were successful in achieving their own or their team success and working towards a common goal. This is a concept that I've been able to apply to various areas of my work and sparked my interest enough, as mentioned, for me to take on an honours project to examine the factors that influence athletes' perspectives of the parasport pathway. This project was developed through wanting to gain basically a deeper understanding of the environment that our Australian Parapathway athletes and Paralympians are part of, and what their perceptions of such were, and therefore what we as a pathway and Paralympics pathway team could focus on to develop and hopefully improve their experiences. It's
Sorry,
also
Natalie. Sorry,
yeah.
Natalie. I'm just going to jump in. Do you have something sharing on your screen?
We should do, but
Sorry, we're just coming up a
one.
blank on our side. So
Okay.
if you had text on your screen,
Let me just double check. One moment.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, thank you. Okay, well, we'll just skip to the next slide. Not sure.
No, are you using two
Is this one
screens?
working?
Perfect. We've got
Okay.
the Imagine strategy.
Brilliant. Thanks. Appreciate it. Okay, so today when we're discussing winning medals with equity and diversity, what are the medals that we're talking about and what are we trying to achieve? The graph on the screen here represents the Australian Paralympic team's historic performance and future goals. The three games that are represented on this graph are Sydney 2000, which is the first one on the left, then Tokyo 2020 in the middle, and then our ideal aims for Brisbane 2032 on the right. The white bar indicates the number of medalists at those games. The green bar is the number of medals won, and the yellow bar is the total team size. In Paralympic sport, we are striving towards producing Australia's best games ever at the Brisbane 2032 Paralympic Games. This would mean bettering our results from Sydney 2000, our current best results, where our Australian Paralympic team was made up of 286 competitors, and together they won 149 medals. If we consider medal count to be the determinant of our best games ever, as this strategy does, then we would need to win 150 medals in 2032. And according to the current modelling, this would likely require a team size of 100 competitors. This is what we are currently working towards and collaborating with the Australian sports system to understand how we can best set out to achieve this. As I mentioned, the graph also indicates the team size and medals won in Tokyo 2020. However, for a bit more of an up-to-date reference point, the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games, our Australian team won 63 medals at these games and had a team of 160 competitors. So clearly there is a bit of a gap between where we currently are and what we're hoping to achieve in the future. And in order to build the team that will need to win the medals we're aiming for, we are going to need more athletes entering the performance pathway, but possibly, I think even more, potentially more importantly, we will need a performance pathway that retains these athletes and develops and supports them to progress further through their performance journey. To get some understanding of the talent pool that we're currently aware of and supporting to do so, we can use our categorisation data as an indicator. We know from our current understanding of categorised athletes in Australia that the number of para-athletes in this system is really quite low, and that the categorisation pipeline is inverted. So as many of us here on this call are probably already across, there are 5 levels of categorisation in our system. And these include when an athlete is first categorised, they may start at emerging and progress through to developing before hopefully continuing on to podium potential, podium ready, and then podium. So to say that the distribution of this is inverted is to say that there are more athletes at the podium end of the spectrum or already at the higher end of their performance or performance potential than there are currently entering the categorization system and ultimately our parasport pathway. Further to this, the total number of para-athletes known to be categorised within our Australian system at the time of this collection was, I think, around 334, keeping in mind that we are aiming to build a Paralympic team of 300, so we're not leaving a lot of room for error there at the moment. But importantly, this is not to say that this is an insurmountable challenge by any means, particularly since it's incredibly difficult to determine exactly what the size of our current talent pool is outside of categorisation data. But we do know that our sports are reporting smaller numbers of potential Paralympic talent at the moment and difficulties identifying new talent and attracting new talent, as well as us hearing from participants that there is an overwhelming lack of environments in which they can develop their skills and continue to grow as athletes. So while we strive towards these very tangible medal count goals, it's also important to note the call-outs and very dedicated work towards the importance of how the Australian sports system wants to achieve this. As it's also indicated on the screen, this is clearly stated in the way that we plan to measure our success in Brisbane 2032 by not only medals and medalists, but also well-being measures and diversity and inclusion. This intent is further emphasised by Australia's HP 2032 Win Well strategy, which many of our sports organisations are signatories to, and includes a pledge that states, "Win Well is our united commitment to success by balancing ambitious performance goals with a culture of care, integrity, fair play, and pride." I think it's really exciting to see these themes of diversity, inclusion, and equity coming through as critical elements of a high performance sporting environment and sporting success. And I think it's useful for us to keep really front of mind today in our conversations and discussions that there is an understanding that these things do not operate independently of each other. Similarly, it's also why I was so stoked when Kelly and Georgia approached me about this symposium, having a focus on winning medals with equity and diversity, because I feel as though the broader system is starting to put a key emphasis on the importance of the type of environments that we're creating in order to foster success for our athletes who are currently in the system, as well as those who are looking to be in the system. So equity and diversity are two words that I feel often, prior to more recent times, are more commonly associated with participation and grassroots sports programs and can be easier to forget when the pursuit of high performance and results becomes the focus. But I firmly believe that they ultimately belong side by side. Since today's discussions will centre around these keywords and ideas, we wanted to provide a bit more background as to exactly what we mean when we reference them and what they relate to in regards to Paralympic sport. So these sorts of conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion were also really critical to my work advising the Australian Sports Commission in the development of an intersectionality framework for leadership and governance in sport. And part of the development of that framework and the action plans as part of it, we determined settled on, a definition for equity to be the process of adjustment of things like support or resources that considers an individual or group's unique need to improve fair access to opportunities. I think another more in-depth or detailed explanation of equity is the idea of not only recognising and acknowledging differences, but valuing them. And as Georgia kindly shared with me recently from Dawn Penny, the idea that having a commitment to equity demands that we do not merely recognise or respect individual cultural differences, but instead we also see them as a resource. Diversity was defined by this group to be all of the individual attributes and experiences that make us unique. These can include demographic diversity, cognitive diversity, background, and lived experiences. And we have some incredible subject matter experts here with us today discussing many of these different demographic diversities, and particularly how we can create environments that embrace and foster this. Another big takeaway from the framework discussions was, of course, also the importance of intersectionality as the key to understanding how the sports industry can refocus to foster the athletes' needs and ensure an environment which appeals to and attracts a broader community, which again, I'm really looking forward to hearing more from other presenters today. So what does it mean to win medals with equity and diversity? It means that those who are interested in wanting to compete for a medal have access to that environment needed to develop, and the development of that environment simultaneously and through a really concerted effort towards equity promotes an environment that is open to and accessible for all, thus increasing the overall potential talent pool because there are more participants engaged. If we don't do this, then we fail to retain the athletes that are currently involved in our pathway, and we're also unlikely to attract many new athletes, which is to say that without a focus on retention and program quality and culture, as well as truly understanding our athletes, talent and attraction and identification is most likely quite limited. Interestingly, these concepts and challenges aren't necessarily unique to parasport, but I do believe that parasport is uniquely positioned to address them and learn from them. I think that the parasport system was honestly built around adaptability and change, which are all key elements to adopting something new and starting fresh, which could be what becomes the system's greatest strength in progressing towards winning medals with equity and diversity. But when we're faced with a challenge of producing our greatest games results ever, and our focus is on how we foster and develop athletes who can achieve these incredible results, I think our focus also needs to turn to building and maintaining a talent pool that can achieve these goals. When we're looking to recruit new talent in parasport, unlike a lot of able-bodied sport recruitment, we don't technically start with the entire population and then reduce our talent pool based on things like age and sport interest and personal attributes or ability and talent potential. We, as many of us know, already have to shrink our talent pool to a much smaller percentage, our potential talent pool to a much smaller percentage of the population, according to those who have an eligible impairment type for Paralympic pathways. And then on top of that, we continue with the other elements of deduction that I mentioned earlier, particularly things like, is that person actually interested in sport, competing in sport? Is that their goal? What sort of performance potential do they have? We also have an ever-changing talent pool in a lot of ways, as people may become eligible at any point in their lifetime as they could acquire an impairment. However, this is not to be confused with saying that we do not have that we have an endless talent pool, as classification criteria change and tighten and medical advances and treatments change, and the need to ensure that our retention rate is arguably higher than our attraction rate by building an environment that people feel they could be part of, and one that retains people because they are here and part of something that they really want to be involved with. This is not only critical in how we engage with the athletes that are already part of and in our system, but also those who are looking from the outside at what we're doing and whether or not this is something that could be for them. The potential athletes currently looking for a place to join in, to be part of a community and engage in the competitive outlet thereafter. And these participants, are they aren't a distant thought of the future. They're already here. They're already watching us and seeing what we're doing in parasport and whether or not they can see themselves in that system. And I think this is a lesson that I learned really quickly and stuck with me in a really profound way that influenced my understanding of high performance sport, what I thought of high performance sport priorities were or should be, when I attended the International Women in Sport Working Group about 2 years ago in New Zealand. This IWG conference was a brilliant opportunity to explore and understand different facets of sport, performance, participation, all around the world. But there was one particular session that really stuck with me that I just wanted to share today, as I think it can really help frame some of our thinking going forward with the rest of the conversations today and panel discussions. I was lucky enough to be invited along to a Youth Voices session on the one day, and there were about 40 women from all around the world under the age of 30 who got together to create a space to discuss the conference so far, what we'd learned, what was challenging us, and what was particularly interesting. So the one activity they set out was to have 5 discussion tables based on the 5 conference themes. And we just had to choose whichever one was of most interest to us and that resonated the most with us. So the 5 themes were leadership, social change, active lives, high performance, and voice and visibility. Of those 40 people in the room, 2 of us, both on the older end of under 30, white cisgender women, chose high performance sport, while all the other themes were really equally distributed. This felt like a huge statement to someone who loves high performance sport and values its place in our industry. So it quickly became the basis of our whole conversation. As such a jarring difference, the main question we posed was, why is nobody else here? And the overwhelming response was, we don't belong there. There isn't a place for me. There isn't a place for me and my friends there. And that the high performance sport environment isn't changing to reflect society's changing perspectives and expectations of a place that everyone is welcome to be part of. Now, I know that's a really big statement, and I understand this was one particular group's conversation at an instant in time, but I don't think it's that dissimilar to the experiences that people on this call may have had, that people we know will have had, and certainly that our para-athletes will have experienced. It's not to say that everyone should necessarily have access to the highest level of performance and competition results, but there does need to be an environment available in which they could develop to that level if they wanted to, and they have the talent and potential to do so. So while we focus so hard on recruiting new talent and new athletes, and we also are also thinking about the environment we're asking them to come into, we need to think about how, and more likely if, they will see themselves and their peers represented there. Sport is elite and exclusive, and performance arguably should be as we strive to push the boundaries of being the very best. But the opportunity to strive towards being part of that and having the resources and support you need as an individual to do so shouldn't be. Similarly, these conversations that I had were reflected again in our ASC intersectionality working group, where conversations around how to introduce the framework and implement it within sports organisations were considered, and the way that using an intersectional approach to building programs and pathways as a tool for sports to promote talent pool expansion and increased performance potential became relevant. All because they would be more likely to be accessing a broader demographic of people, and therefore the potential for a greater talent pool than before. So how can we reach our full potential if we aren't open to this challenge? The talent pool can't grow to the size that we need it to in order to achieve our goals and succeed without opening our sports system to everyone who's potentially interested in it. In many ways, I think that prioritizing the talent development environment, we were discouraging people before they even got to the door, and our talent pool will only continue to shrink further and further unless we focus on this. This is also important to consider in the context of parasport pathways specifically, where participation in pathways or performance pathways are often very closely linked, if not intertwined. I understand that this will be a topic of discussion later today, but as we know, it's often largely due to resourcing and participation-based sizes, as well as the current progression rate of talent potential athletes. But I think it puts parasport in a really unique position where either our environments can be built to support both retention and attraction simultaneously, or if we don't really put too much into fostering these development environments, it can unfortunately be detrimental to both elements just as quickly. If we focus on creating environments that clearly centre the athletes they're trying to develop and look to understand them and their needs first, while also embracing the whole person, then we are more likely to produce a space that retains and supports our current athletes to reduce the dropout rate, but also one that feels open to new people exploring the sports. I think it's really exciting to say that we have a choice about how we build our system towards Brisbane 2032 and beyond, and that we can, as part of that, choose whether or not this will be a system that strives to not only attract new participants, but really works hard to retain those who are here, who are engaged and do want to prioritise their potential opportunities in parasport. And that's something that we can do by prioritising the athlete and welcoming their diversity while creating equitable opportunities and spaces for development. So how do we create these environments that people not only feel welcome to join, but want to stay and foster their development and simultaneously encourage others to join as well? I think this is something that we do by creating environments that harness exactly what it is that's unique about parasport and use it to our advantage. There's no need to model programs of what's already been done previously and try and make it fit. I think we really have the opportunity to try something a bit different. And it's critical that we explore those learnings from the past first, but then embrace some sort of change. And one particular example of that I wanted to share is some recent work that I've done in the Northern Territory with their Para Futures program. This is in no way to say that I think this is the only example of this. I know that there's plenty of this sort of work happening all around Queensland and Australia, but it is to say that I'm not sure that this way of working is the norm yet, and it's more of a pocket of disruption around what has been happening. So I wanted to share some of that experience that sort of creates a talent environment with a focus on equity and diversity, as something which I understand can sometimes seem quite challenging, or at least fairly removed from the traditional focuses of a high performance environment. But there are simple ways to embrace this and use it to our advantage. So over the last probably not quite 12 months, I've had the privilege of spending time in Darwin and working really closely with the Northern Territory Sports Academy to explore opportunities to support para-athletes and their pathways in the NT. This has been an incredible learning experience, and the program that we built is one that I probably feel most proud of during my time at PA. But this is not necessarily just because of the outcomes of the program or what we've been able to build. Honestly, it's about how we've built it. So on the screen, just to share a few images of the people and the community who are bringing this program to life in Darwin and broader regions of NT. On the left is my visit to the NT swimming program with their CEO, coach, and current pathway athletes. In the top right is, again, myself with our athletics pathway athletes and their coach and head of NT athletics. And in the bottom, there is an image with the Darwin Salties wheelchair basketball team, who are pictured with our NTSA Para Futures athletes and Alison Crape, the chair of PA. So when I first visited the NT, it was really clear to me that it would be necessary to spend time on the ground there in person and learn more about the place and people, and what does and doesn't work there. So it's a brilliant process, and one that I'm so glad that I got to do, because it really made the rest of the collaboration so much easier. There was a really significant level of importance placed on understanding that upfront, and NTSA taught me so much about the culture and community in NT and what would and wouldn't likely work in their setting. And on the other hand, I was able to use some of my experience in para pathways, but also my honours research into athlete perspectives of the para pathway. And interestingly, a lot of our learnings aligned in many ways. So we knew we wanted a program that emphasised the importance of athlete support network and aligning expectations between all stakeholders involved. So when we started out, NTSA had a Foundations and Futures program for any athletes in Darwin who were interested in having some pre-categorised support, and they had worked through with one para pathway athlete, as well as ongoing support of several Australian wheelchair basketball athletes. Through our conversations with the NTSA, we determined that the NT pathway was in need of a para-specific support program and network that focused on the athlete's needs, collaborating between key stakeholders and bringing the athlete support network along the journey. We were also really clear that we didn't know who our athletes would be. We didn't know who we would be attracting, what sport or sport background and experience they would come from, and exactly what support would suit them. But we did want a program that was open to supporting anyone who was coming along. This approach to building a program to support pre-categorised athletes meant that the entire focus of our work was to ensure that the athlete and their support network would feel comfortable being involved and connected to what we were wanting to achieve. We started with 3 athletes from 2 different sports that we'd connected with, and the staff met with their athletes, their coaches, relevant SSO representatives, athletes and family support network to learn more about their athlete, to understand the athlete and their goals, their drive, and what where they were at on their parasport pathway experience, and ultimately what would best support them to progress further. I strongly believe that the fact that we had the opportunity to build a program and now pathway completely from scratch and specifically tailored to para needs, and at the time we took the time to build a program that was reflective of the environment and community that we wanted to support, is what has created a successful program. This was the creation of something different to what had been done before, and it had a distinct emphasis on understanding the individual athlete and their needs. So as I said, we initially had about 3 athletes, and this continued to grow along the way. The creation of the program has been an incredible experience to be part of, and ultimately a lesson in trying something completely new and different, and taking the time to understand and explore context and prioritize learning from past experiences to understand what we need to do next to get the best possible outcomes. Like I said, this program's been going for less than 12 months. Our first athlete started earlier this year, and it's now through the success of that program, and I think the approach that the NTSA has taken has grown to a program of 10 athletes, with 5 who identify as male, 5 identifying as female. We have 8 athletes with a physical impairment, 1 with vision impairment, 1 with intellectual impairment, 3 First Nations athletes. Our youngest athlete is barely in high school, and the oldest is in their 60s, and they compete across athletics, swimming, wheelchair basketball, badminton, and blind football. So creating a program that is specifically tailored to and developed for parasport and parasport athletes ultimately resulted in a 900% increase in supported athletes, complete alignment between the NIN, relevant SSOs and NSO contacts, and that was in areas that was previously somewhat fractured, and athletes who understand their potential pathway and how to progress through it, as well as feeling supported to do so. And somewhat most importantly, I think, a support network around these athletes who are along for the journey, educated and upskilled to assist, and included completely in their learning process. The greatest success has come from knowing that this program has created an environment and experiences that these athletes would not otherwise have necessarily had within their individual sports, but one that they believe is working to continue their development within the sport. So this also means that these athletes have now become advocates for the program themselves and positively sharing their experiences with others to encourage them to also want to come along and be part of ParaFutures, while the athletes in this program are being retained because they genuinely believe in what we're doing. This is exactly what learning from our past and creating inclusive environments can do. I think that fostering a culture of support and development that retains the current athletes while simultaneously attracting the next generation to engage in it and want to be part of it is our ultimate goal. As I said, this is by no means a unique situation or a first for parasport. This program in NT, there are plenty of examples of it happening, but I do think that sometimes we potentially consider change to be a little bit too hard, or the challenge of bringing diversity and inclusion to the high performance space can be really challenging and full of barriers. But I'd argue that if any of our sports system can do it, it's parasport. We have a system that already embraces and thrives on diversity, and we know what it takes to foster and achieve equity. Parasport has always been adaptable, resourceful, and innovative, sometimes largely potentially forced to be, and make our presence known and heard in a broader Australian sports system. But this is a really powerful tool, and one that I think could be our greatest strength in striving towards winning medals with equity and diversity. So finally, I just wanted to share a video that was created off the back of the Paris 2024 Paralympics campaign. I think it's a great video to prompt reflection for us all today, and not only on what our team, the Australian Paralympic team, can achieve at the highest level of performance, but what it means to them as athletes and as people, and to their own support networks, and what they hope the rest of us can learn from their experiences and their performance. As mentioned, there are so many experts here today who will be sharing lots and lots more on the practical how of achieving these outcomes and embracing diversity in different spaces and creating environments that foster that and retain athletes. But I think this is another critical perspective and reminder of some of the whys. So this video sums up from the perspective of our Paris Paralympians themselves, who are at the highest level of performance, what matters most about the space that we are all in. It challenges us to look closely at what we've learnt and is similar to how we can approach today's conversations and discussions. It's not necessarily all about us having to create these huge, grand new ideas to promote diversity and inclusion in parasport, but rather I think about spending the time to reflect on what we individually know and what our industry collectively has learnt and how we can use that to our advantage. But I will leave that up to the Paralympians to share their message.
So there you have it. 11 days of wonder, where people with disability have run the world. Our mob of talented, passionate people who have made a difference, a contribution to society and to each other through sport.
This is the race that inspires a nation, a comeback story all of Australia has rallied behind.
An absolute superstar with a heart of gold who conquered the world.
Alexa Leary, it is your moment. She's truly one in a million.
The fearless who exceeded the highest of expectations.
McGrath, unstoppable and unbeatable.
You know, we're just out here doing sport, so it's not actually that important, but when we're representing people and countries and our family members, it means more.
A place where you don't need a medal to be validated.
Fighting on for a bronze medal. Is he going to get there? Don't think so.
What a games. 3 years of work, both races decided in 1 metre each.
What you represent, I'm telling you, is more than enough. I love you, brother. These games have shown what we're capable of.
Turner triumphs again. Hodge, the 4-year-old boy who feared he'd never be good at anything. Vanessa Lowe, world record in Paris. Callum Simpson, swimming, has given this kid a swagger. Today, they've conquered the greatest challenge of them all. Gold, gold, gold for Australia.
But they only happen every 4 years. So, what have we learned? What have you learned? Are we really listening?
I was bullied all through my high school years, and I didn't think like someone like me could make it here.
It's been hard growing up in Australia, in where I used to live on the farm. It's tough because I'm the only person with a disability in that area.
Being different is actually even cooler. It makes you unique. If everyone was the same, it'd be a bit of a boring world, and I always say if you can't change it, embrace it.
Once the curtain comes down in Paris, do not forget us.
She said, Mum, do you know what? It's so good to be here and to walk around and not feel different and to know that nobody's staring at us because we're all different here. And I just thought that summed it up for me.
We want you to take what you've seen into everyday life. Your workplaces, your schools, your communities. I don't know, will there be less bullying? More job opportunities? More representation on our screens? It's time to invest in us. Support us. Believe in us. Genuine inclusion.
Big part of being Australian, it's not always about being the best, it's about trying your best.
We aren't leaving anyone behind. Because this is our normal. And we need it to be yours. They're powerful words if acted upon. And we promise you won't regret it.
So as we finish up this presentation, thank you so much. But I just wanted to say, as we look towards the next few sessions and all the different conversations we're going to be having today, I just really hope that we can go to those with some reflections around what are we learning from each other and what can we learn from each other in our collective experience? What sort of environments are we creating to not only attract new talent, but also work really hard to retain those who are there and are wanting to progress through the para pathway. And ultimately, how can we use diversity and equity to ensure that we are reaching our full performance potential by attracting the biggest possible talent pool that we can? So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Natalie. If you could stop sharing your screen, that would be wonderful. We've had a couple of questions come through. I'm just going to read them out for you. We've had one question from Coral around, is the intersectionality working group framework that you mentioned available publicly? And if so, could you provide any information on that?
Sure. It hasn't been released as of yet. They're still so that we were advising to the Myriad Kofkin consulting team, who are the ones writing the actual framework themselves. I have and as I said, it's unfortunately not publicly available yet, but to give you a bit of an idea, it's an action plan that can be applied to ultimately aim towards board level of an organization to reframe decision making and understand the power structures in place that might be in place within the sport as a tool to understand how we engage with more diverse and inclusive environments. So it's sort of like, it's a 3-step action plan.
Beautiful. We also have another question from Camilla. What lessons do you think we have learned from Paris that can be applied going towards Brisbane 2032 to create more opportunities?
Great question. I think there's lots of things that we can take away from Paris, the Games itself, the lead into Paris, and what we're working towards, as you say, towards Brisbane 2032. I think for me, I really hope that we embrace like what a lot of the athletes said there and their support network said in that video around how important it is to think beyond just the sports results itself and how we're engaging with people and what sort of messaging we're sending. And I think that is something that's really I guess easier to think of in a social change context, but it also has really real implications and applications to a performance space and how we retain our athletes. I think that it's brilliant to have lots of focus on identifying new talent, but we also have, as I said, pretty small talent pool as it is to begin with. So the more that we can retain those who are here and encourage them to want to continue to progress towards things like Brisbane 2032, the better.
Yeah, and that's so perfect because that actually leads us into another question from Jonathan asking, how have you or any potential new athletes, potentially from the NT, identified any key issues that have been turning people off high performance? So how do we retain them and what are the key issues that are pushing people away that you've noticed?
Sure. I think that as many of us on the call could probably agree, unfortunately, there are probably quite a number of barriers, not just to entry, but to rather staying in these programs. And I do think certainly things that came out in my honours learning through my honours project, but as I said, that was really closely reflected with the Northern Territory work as well, is that things like an alignment of expectations between and understanding what the pathway is and how to progress through that pathway between those facilitating the pathway and those in the pathway is really disjointed. And I think that's not really a huge thing to overcome. I don't think that's a matter of communication, and that's a matter of wanting to take your athletes through the journey and understand their goals and what your expectations are. It's a communication piece there. So there's a lot of things that are quite I think quite simple to implement ultimately, and also the understanding of the importance of the support network. That is true for all athletes, but I do think that for the para-athlete space, a support network plays an incredibly important role beyond that in able-body potentially, and how you engage with that support network and ensure that they are part of they know what's happening, they understand the pathway and the environment that their athlete is in, but also that that athlete knows that they have an entire support team around them and that everyone is connected and aligned on what they're trying to achieve and communicating that. And I think as much connection as we can get between the different parts of the pathway, the better.
And you know what I did say at the beginning, I didn't want to make this about me, but here we are.
I'd never expect that.
Natalie, well, now you've been a part of my support network as, you know, my journey transitioning from basketball to rugby and, you know, in all things that I do. So I wholeheartedly agree that your support network it has a direct impact on the retention of athletes, because I know I've gone to you and wanted to throw my hands up and I don't want to do it. And you've, you know, walked me, you know, away, turned that mindset around. So, you know, it is, I think for those people listening as well, crucial if we can have positive and engaging people around the athletes.
Absolutely.
It makes such a big difference.
And it impacts the impact is so much broader than that one athlete in that program as well. Like when, as we sort of briefly touched on, but I know will be spoken more later, in a lot of the environments that we're in for parasport or para athletes are in, the performance and participation space is very closely connected, and they're in the same space more likely than not. So for athletes who are just entering that program or that pathway, whatever it is, for them to be able to see what sort of experiences a more advanced pathway athlete is having and how they're feeling about the program they're in, that's a really influential role as well. So for us to provide that support around the pathway athlete, for them to feel like they're somewhere that they want to be and they want to encourage others to be, it kind of does in a really, you know, condensed version, but it sort of does our job, both our jobs for us. If we focus on that retention piece, the attraction one, not that you can ignore it, but it will be supported along the way too.
Beautiful. All right. Thanks, Nat. And I think
thank you so much.
I think we're going to have to stop there. Just noticed the time just to keep moving. So I just want to thank you so much, Natalie, for your time and your presentation. I know I've learned so much, and I learn so much from you every single day. So thank you.